Hey class, now I want to share with you some of the details about how I worked with my client to facilitate the analyze and improve portions of the agenda that we looked at earlier. Now, typically when I'm doing Kaizens, I've got two go-to tools that I use in all Kaizens. One is the downtime tool, which you guys are very familiar with, and the other is the cause-effect or fishbone diagram that most of you are probably familiar with. And it just depends on what type of problem that we're going after in the Kaizen event. If we're trying to focus on doing something faster and streamlining, then the downtime tool is typically the one that I go to first, because it's all about if we get rid of downtime, we're going to go from start to finish quicker. The other tool is if we're just trying to figure out why something's happening, a cause to a problem, the cause-effect diagram is my go-to tool there. Now in this case, this project was really about removing more material from these tanks and doing that quickly, and so it was more about streamlining. So the downtime tool really was really the right tool to use here. And what I'm going to share with you here, whether you're using downtime or the cause-effect diagram, a lot of the same principles and my facilitation techniques work in both cases. So for this particular session, what we did was we first had to educate the team on what downtime is. And so within 5 minutes, this is really easy to do. And that's why the downtime and the cause-effect diagrams are my favorite tools to use here, because it doesn't take much for people to understand how to use the tool and the end result that you're after. So we spent about 5 minutes just explaining what's downtime, went through each of the categories, gave some examples, and then we came right back to defects being the first part of downtime. And there's a couple approaches that I've tried here. One is just to say, okay, now throw out to me all the different types of defects, overproduction, weighting, etc., that are in this process. And what I've found is that's just way too much for people to comprehend and come up with a lot of good ideas, because that's what we're really after here, is coming up with as many causes as possible. And so it's all about volume. And so instead of throwing it out at them all in one big chunk, what I found works better is to zoom in on each one of the downtime categories and brainstorm each one individually. And so having these little rapid, short brainstorming sessions around defects, then around overproduction, then around weighting, and then around not using people well, etc., generates, from my experience, a lot more results. And so that's exactly what we did here. We brainstormed around where are all the defects, and we did this as a silent brainstorming exercise, because another thing that I've discovered over the years of doing this is that when you do it as a group, what I've found is that people talk a lot and they come up with all sorts of things that they think are causing the problem, but nobody's writing anything. And so you as a facilitator get frustrated, because at the end of this whole session, you should have a whole bunch of post-it notes with a bunch of causes on them. That's ultimately what you as a facilitator want. And when you do it as a group, you end up with a lot of people talking and nobody's writing, or the facilitator's writing and you're trying to interpret their words on the post-its. It just becomes a real challenge and it just becomes really frustrating. And so what I've found works much better is to have them sit silently for about 5 to maybe 10 minutes and just write out their ideas, one cause per post-it. And so just do it on defects. So within about 5 or 10 minutes, usually that's about when they reach their saturation point and they've come up with as many causes as they can. They just stop and you can get a sense that everybody's done writing, which is usually about 5 to 10 minutes. And then everybody just then simply reads the post-its that they've come up with, and there's no critiquing, no evaluating. People will want to do that, but you'll have to stop them from doing that. And they just simply read it off and say, here's my defect, and they give it to you and you stick it up on your flip chart. And then if other people have something similar, just tell them, hey, throw out your ideas so that we can start grouping these together where we have a lot of commonality. And so that's what we did here. We just went around with this group of about 8 folks. They all threw all their ideas out there, and as they were doing that, other people said, hey, I've got one like that, I got one like that, and we started to see some categories. You can kind of see some of these. We had categories like this one. We had equipment reliability. We had a bunch of issues around equipment reliability, and so you can start to categorize these as well. Then the next challenge becomes when you get done with this. So in our example here, our case this week, we had 132 post-its. So then it's like, okay, well, we can't fix 132 causes. Not all of these are probably worth fixing. The next step becomes, well, where should we focus? What's causing most of the issues? Which of these are truly legitimate issues? And so one of the things that I did was I took out and used the Pareto tool. And so one simple way to do some analysis is just simply to look at the number of causes that have been put into each of these categories. And so here's a Pareto analysis that some of you might be familiar with if you used this in your assignment last week. And we found that of the 132 post-its, 31 were on the weighting flip chart, 20 were on the defects flip chart, and those two combined were 40% of all the ideas. Then when we started to add in not using people well, we got up to 50% of the post-its. So this doesn't necessarily mean this is the biggest cause of the problem. It just seems to be where most of the energy or most of the causes from the team came from and what category they fall under. So this will help you start to narrow the focus potentially. The other thing that we did in this session was to vote on the different causes. So you can see these little purple post-its on here. And so there's a couple approaches you can take to voting. And some of you have probably done some of this in the past where you can tell people, hey, you got 2 votes or 3 votes, just go stick your post-its up there on the top votes. What happens when people do that is they start to bias their opinions when they see everybody putting all the purple post-its, which is what showed the votes on these, over in one area where they think, hey, they should be, how come nobody's voting on this one? It tends to bias people's opinions and start to doubt themselves and say, hey, I think this is really causing the problem, but it looks like everybody thinks that one is, so I'm going to go over there and put my post-it on that one. And so instead of doing that, we just simply told people to write on their post-its. We gave them 3 post-its and said, what are your top 3 issues? So we gave them about 10 minutes to walk around, read through all the post-its and think about it, and write down which are your top 3. And we numbered each one of the post-its, the yellow post-its, so they could just write on there, like if for defects, we had like D1 through D15. And so they just wrote D15 on their post-it on one of their votes, and then they wrote N1 for not using people well, etc. And once they had their 3 votes done, they gave those to my client that was facilitating this. And during a break, he went and put up all these purple post-its. So that it was purely anonymous, that nobody was biased by their votes. And the great thing about this is it's very visual. So you could see that not using people well didn't really get too many votes. Overproduction didn't get too many votes, but defects got quite a few, and so did waiting. And so this helps us narrow the focus to the major causes. And then we can start discussing the ones that have the purple. And that's exactly what we did, which then led to the next step in this process, which was coming up with the root cause analysis plan. And in this case, a lot of times what happens is we'll just start with this cause of the problem. So this first column here is what was actually on the post-it. And so we just wrote in here in our root cause analysis plan, what are the top causes that got the most votes that we've agreed that we should focus on. And in most cases, we would stop here and we'd say, let's just throw some solutions at these top causes. But what's missing before we get to the solution is going out and actually investigating, why do we think this is really causing the problem? And based on that investigation, is this cause guilty or innocent of creating the problem that we're trying to solve? Because what will happen is we'll throw solutions at these causes without investigating and making sure they're valid, legitimate causes, and it's a lot of wasted effort that will not yield any results. So this is a little difficult in a Kaizen event, and a lot of this is just going to be based on experience, but sometimes we have data to do this investigation. So what this team did was it came up with this investigation plan, which is column C here. And so we said, well, what could we do to investigate that, not having this material available for this first row example, for example, is we don't have this material available, and it's just based on the team's previous experience that this is causing the problem, which was not being able to remove this material in a rapid fashion. But then when we asked one of the experts in the room what his experience was with when this material is not available, how much delay does that cause, he said it's only about 4 to 8 hours a month. So that doesn't seem like very much in the course of an entire month, since it's a 24/7 operation. And so the team agreed that that's innocent of causing this problem. So if we wouldn't have gone through this step, we would have implemented solutions to these causes over here in column B that we later found to be really innocent of really causing this problem. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the causes that we immediately ruled out and said, these aren't really major issues. But we did end up with 2 down here at the bottom that we said, dealing with permits was one of the issues that we think is really causing our problem. And that took us to the last step in this process, which was building our improvement plan, to where we're looking at these permit delays. And so the improvement plan, which you're looking at here now, includes putting in what is a solution we can implement that minimizes or eliminates this cause, who's going to do it, when's it going to be done by, but then most importantly, which is how do we know it's actually worked? So this is a step that's sometimes skipped in this process as well. So we just come up with the action plan, who's going to do it, when it's done by, but then we don't really have a way to validate that specific action as to whether or not it worked. Now we do have the overall metric in this case, the cubic yards per day that we're removing, and if it increases, then we could say, well, all the solutions that we implemented helped us achieve that, but it's always nice to have individually for each one of these solutions just some way to determine, is this actually working? And then the last step in this process, which we haven't gotten to yet, would be validating, the results. Did it work? What were the results? And if it didn't work, what could we go back and change or redo, or maybe not? Maybe this solution didn't work and it didn't really impact our overall metrics, so it didn't matter in the end. But looking at those results is a critical last step in this process to evaluate how effective that solution was. So I hope this is a real world example. It's a little bit dirty and messy at this point because we haven't really polished up this presentation or any of the tools or the stuff that we use this week, which is another thing to be thinking about too, is like, you don't want to get overly polished in this stuff because a lot of that's non-value added work. So that's something else that you want to talk with your champion about, is at the end of the session, what do you want from this as far as documentation? So a lot of champions that I work with say, what I've just shared with you guys in these videos is all you really need. They're not looking for some polished presentation you're going to spend hours and hours and hours on. They're just looking for results. And then having something to tell the story of how we achieve the results to help spread more of this good stuff like Kaizen throughout the organization. So that's another way of minimizing downtime to some degree, if you look at it from that perspective, in the presentation process and documentation process, is understanding from the champion, what do they expect in the way of documentation as well. So hopefully this series of short videos is going to help you guys understand Kaizen a little bit more, see a real world example here, and I look forward to seeing your assignments this week and giving you some feedback. And as always, if you've got questions, let me know and I'll be glad to answer them. Thanks.